Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to another segment of Check Attack with Media, with Aqeel, speaking to you this evening about the management of exam stress, stress in general, I suppose, as well, since I'm sure everybody suffers from some form of stress that can be dealt with quite effectively. And we're going to be speaking to Ayesha-Bibi Khan quite soon. So, without any further ado, I suppose, Aqeel, um, we could bring Aisha on. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Aisha.
Walaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Shukran for having me.
Yes, and shukran to you for making yourself available for this discussion this evening about stress management. Seems like you've got that quite covered with your own techniques and quirks on how to do so. And so we're hoping that students can benefit from that as well.
Inshallah.
So, what can you tell us about stress management from your perspective as someone that has perhaps been stressed out at a time and gone out and actually figured out what works for you and how can others benefit from it?
Okay, so I was just speaking to Aqeel, before we went live, and I was saying that stress is actually such a normal part of our lives, and like you said, whether it's as a student or just in general day life, it's such a normal part. And I think a lot of the time we think of stress as a very negative thing, a very bad thing. But before we actually start, I want to say that it's not always a bad thing. It's not always a bad word. So, if it affects us negatively, then it is a negative thing. Then if it's, bringing up negative emotions and we're unable to deal with the stress, then it's a negative thing. But for a lot of us, stress actually drives us and motivates us, and we all need a little bit of good stress to actually get through the exams and study. If we didn't have the stress at all, I don't think any of us would actually eat the books and go and study. So that's the first thing I want to say. It's not always a negative thing, but obviously if it does become a negative thing, we then do need to be able to manage it. So just in relation to why I'm speaking about them, I am an occupational therapist, and it is a component of what we do with our clients, because like it's part of everyone's life. So it is something that you incorporate into intervention with clients as well. Okay, so yeah, so that's a little bit of a background about what I know about stress. I also want to just mention that I was also a very big stressor, especially
Mm.
during undergrad. And one thing I can say for me, it didn't do good. I was the stressor that I ended up procrastinating, and alhamdulillah, I passed. I don't know how, but it happened. But during, actually studying and then now working with students myself, because I lecture now at university,
Mm.
I realize how beneficial techniques are, and how, with postgrad studies, all of that could have been, could have actually just been alleviated through very, very simple day to day techniques.
And it's kind of a thing of if only I knew that before, eh?
Absolutely, absolutely, and it's not a selling a kill as well. It's not anything complicated. It's things that we can very naturally and very quickly just incorporate into our lives.
Akil, I'm not sure what you were about to say. Unmute yourself first.
Oh, right, I'm muted. Fantastic. Okay, so I think Aisha, it's so important that you mentioned that a certain amount of stress is actually necessary, and I've been reading a little bit about what it is which makes people, people kind of talk about this concept of a flow state, right? Which is the period where everything is just working together, and you're at absolute optimal. You're doing better than even you imagined you could do. And they studied this in like neurosurgeons and elite athletes and elite public speakers, trying to figure out, what is the optimal range, and it's somewhere between not being stressed and being extremely stressed. And there's this kind of state where um, you have a little bit of dopamine and a little bit of cortisol, and your heart rate is at a specific rate, and anything outside of that range, and you're not functioning at optimal. And so the concept then of managing stress, because ultimately anyone in an exam situation, unless you're like psychopathic, um, is going to experience that sense of pressure. And often it gets to the stage where, it becomes overwhelming. And, like you say, when you're at university or when you're in your final years of school, it becomes you struggle to cope, or you end up procrastinating more than you should. Um, and so, yeah, I'd love for you to get into it and tell us a little bit about these techniques, and how they relate to individuals. And do we have different techniques for different people?
Okay, so um, just in relation to that, I think part of why this is such an important topic is because, firstly, it is so normalized in our lives, but secondly, because the switch from going to that good stress to being completely overwhelmed happens so quickly. And that is why this is actually managing the stress is so important. And it's the difference between, managing and not managing is the difference between actually doing well in an exam, for example, or not. So it is actually a very, very important concept within everyday life. So yeah, I can go into to some of the techniques or some of that management if that's okay. I think Shakil's talking, but he's
Yes,
mute.
yes, please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Okay, so I do tend to talk continuously. So at any point, if there's anything I need to clarify, go ahead and stop me. Let me just open. Firstly, I'm going to relate this to obviously my own experience and professional experience as an OT, but also in relation to some of the things, um, trying to keep it also within what Quran and Sunnah also speaks about, because what I found is that those things actually go hand in hand. So Quran and Sunnah also gives us techniques, and it's gone quite hand in hand with what I've learned professionally as well. So one of the first things I would like to mention that personally helped me is something called gratitude journaling. And what it does is it actually just puts things into perspective for us. This is now become quite a universal thing. People are doing it every day, and it's so simple to do because all we need to do is to take a little bit of time out of our day and perhaps just identify three things to be grateful for every day. And immediately this helps with the alleviating any of that negative emotion. So it doesn't mean it's going to take away the stress, but it does help to alleviate it a little bit, because the moment you acknowledge the things that you're grateful for, it gives us a sense of happiness, and it allows us to calm down a little bit. So that is something very important, and I think it's something very simple that we can actually just incorporate into our day-to-day lives. And in line with this, I think what's very important and is not always easy as a student is to also, part of the gratitude is to not compare. So as a student, we always checking in with each other, but part of the gratitude is to try and not compare ourselves to others, because that can definitely lead to stress. Ultimately, you have your strengths, so do other people, and we you not perhaps doing not the best in the class, someone else is, and where you are, they're not. So, that comparison can lead to a lot of stress and can take away of the gratitude that we feel. So that's the first thing I'm gonna speak about. Then after that, I think setting boundaries for ourselves. So especially currently, with the pandemic and COVID-19, there is so much going on. There is things are completely changed. Students have to do things completely differently. Everything is virtual, and that change in itself can cause so much stress. So setting boundaries for ourselves, setting a time. This is the time I'm going to go online and check the news, or this is every day for 20 minutes or to half an hour. That is the time I set aside to read about the news stats. It's also something simple. It's something simple to implement. I think for some of us it's not as easy because we are on our phones a lot. But I think that could also reduce stress a lot, because all the the moment you're online, there's something negative, and that can become all-consuming. So be aware of current affairs, but set a boundary on how much you are actually reading about everything. And just, rather schedule it into your day every day than to make your whole day about being online. Okay. Is there any questions so far?
Any
Because
last
I'm
words
going.
with regards to? Yeah, we have to close soon, but
Okay.
any last words, particularly with regards to the exam, on the day or preparation prior to, before we close, please, Asha.
Okay, so I think the first thing, again, a difficult one, but I would advise is to try and rest well. A tired mind leads to a stressful mind. And then I would also advise, to take very deep breaths. It also calms us down quite a lot. So when it is nearing your exams, just, actually be conscious of the breathing. So deep breaths, and the last thing I will leave that I think is extremely important, is to pray. So for many of us, dua and prayer is actually a stress reliever in itself, because it reminds us obviously that ultimately Allah is in control. So I think that would be my top three tips for students.
Unmute Aqeel.
There we go. That's better. I think that really is incredible advice, and there's simple, actionable steps which we can take to try and relieve that stress. And I'm assuming both myself and Shakeel are going to be under relatively soon,
Currently,
or currently, shame. But yeah, I think it's also about figuring out what works for you, and more importantly, preparation is so important. I realize that a lot of people get into the rut of having this immense amount of pressure the night before an exam, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that we haven't worked in advance. And I know it sounds boring, and I know that sometimes that simply isn't possible, but a little bit of time outside of the socials can go a long way in helping to alleviate that stress. But Aisha, I think you've given us some fantastic, fantastic advice this evening, and hopefully we can chat about this and managing stress outside of just exam situations soon.
yeah.
Thank you.
Shukran to you, Aisha. We'll catch
Afwan,
up.
I hope this helps to everyone watching.
Definitely. Thanks so much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Please remain tuned in as we speak to Craig Ray about the Springbok rugby win after the short ad break. Assalamu alaikum to Aisha and audience.